As we read in John 1 verses 4 to 5, regarding the Logos, Jesus. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Throughout John's Gospel, the terms life and light will be used in connection with our salvation from sin, but in the opening words to the prologue of John's Gospel we see these terms specifically in connection with creation. Echoing the creation account in Genesis 1 verses 1 to 3, John tells us that Jesus is the source of all things, including life, having the source of life in himself, John 5 verse 26. In fact, it was through Jesus Christ that God created all things. Furthermore, Jesus is the light, which, as we saw, may be a reference to the fact that each one of us are created in God's image, or to the fact that Jesus is the one who illumines our minds so that we know and understand truth. But verse 4 and 5 of John's prologue also served as a bridge between creation and redemption, and they introduced to us two important terms, darkness and light, which will appear through this gospel in connection with human sin and God's graciousness in saving us from our sin. Having learned that Jesus is the life and the source of light in creation, in verse 5 John introduces a distinction we will find throughout the balance of this gospel between darkness and light. Against the backdrop of the creation account in Genesis chapter 1, it is apparent that darkness is the absence of light. John's point is that before God created anything, including the heaven and earth, there was nothing but darkness, until that moment captured in the words of Genesis 1 verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. It was in the midst of this darkness that the light, the Logos, shined, overcoming the darkness. This imagery is rich and vital to understand. First, before God created the heaven and earth, there was nothing but darkness. Only the triune God, who existed eternally in intertrinitarian love as each of the members of the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, enjoyed the most intimate and perfect fellowship with one another. God was not lonely, pining away from lack of companionship when He created us, as though He was bored and needed us to love and adore Him. God is not in any sense dependent upon the creation. Rather, the creation is dependent in every sense upon God for its existence. Second, light and darkness are not two eternal forces warring against each other. Darkness is the absence of light. Darkness doesn't exist, so it cannot fight against the light. Darkness is but another way of saying that there was nothing at all until the heavens and earth were created through the Logos, who in his act of creating all things overcomes the darkness. This also means all things have beginning, including heaven. There is no eternal dualism between spirit and matter, as we see in pagan religious. It also means that we must give up the idea of heaven as the place where God lives, as though God's presence was localized to some remote place far away with golden streets and angels playing harps. It is not as though God's head were at one end of creation and His feet at the other. Rather, God fills all of creation with all of His attributes and divinities simultaneously present throughout everything He has created, both things visible and invisible. God is revealed to us in heaven, but heaven too is created, and therefore not eternal. Heaven is that realm of real but spiritual creatures, the angel, and the home of those souls of those who have died and are now in the presence of the Lord. Darkness was all there was until God created the heaven and earth through the Logos, who was said to be light. In this sense then, the Logos overcomes the darkness as the agent of creation. But in verse 5, John's use of light and dark takes on an additional meaning. A metaphorical shift has taken place from what was before all things were created, physical darkness as in the absence of light, to what was happened to Adam's race after our fall into sin, darkness as the human condition after Adam's fall into sin. When the human race fell into sin, the light of creation returned to darkness. When we are speaking in terms of redemption, darkness is not just the absence of created things, darkness is John's preferred metaphor for evil and ignorance of the truth. Some 10 times in this gospel and in his epistle John will speak of evil as darkness. So, for John, light, the Logos, dispelled the darkness when he created of all things. But when Adam fell into sin, darkness came upon all things. But light once again dispels the darkness through that redemption accomplished by Jesus Christ, who is the Word made flesh. The stage is now set for the important explanation John will make about human sinfulness in chapter 3 verse 19 to 20, and this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. Darkness is an ethical quality, the willful refusal to see and understand what is true. Because of our sinful prejudice against the things of God. Because people are sinful by nature, we prefer to live in darkness, ignorance of the truth. Apart from the light of Christ, people do not, and indeed cannot, understand the true nature of things. This is why the Jews do not accept Jesus as their Messiah when he comes, despite the fact that his miracles and teaching prove he has been sent by God. This is also the explanation John would give us to why people reject Jesus today, and why there are so many false religions, philosophies, and ideologies. Since people are sinful, their deeds are evil. And because their deeds are evil, they prefer darkness to light, ignorance to truth. People who live in ignorance assume they are not accountable. Non-Christians do not see things as Christians do, and this has nothing to do with bad eyesight or intelligence. It has to do with moral prejudice against the things of God. Because people are born with sinful nature, they reject the things of God. The light of truth exposes people's innate sinfulness by reminding them of God's holiness. People sin because we like to do evil. People reject Jesus because we hate the light he brings, and which he represents. People hate the things of God because we do not want to be confronted in our sin, nor told what to believe. So, before John's Gospel begins to tell us the story of Jesus' messianic ministry, we know that even his own people, the Jews, will be hostile to Jesus and his message. We already know why Jesus will be rejected. Light comes to darkness and we hate it. But notice too what John says when the theme shifts from creation to redemption: the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That one who created all things, who replaces the darkness of nothingness with the light of the creation, will also overcome human sinfulness. Jesus may suffer and even die, but human sin will be defeated and overcome. So even before we begin reading of Jesus' messianic mission, we know his miracles reflect the power of God, and Jesus can claim to be God, I am, because he is God. We also know that his own will reject him and even put him to death, but he will overcome in the end. Jesus will indeed rise again from the dead, having secured our redemption. He will ascend into heaven, and he will send us the blessed Holy Spirit. Light overcome darkness.